is going on, everybody? Welcome back, and thank you for joining us again on Grace Speaks, a Grace Church podcast. My name is Mike Vecchio, and I am your host for the day. And to my right and sitting across from me, I have two very distinguished guests. To my right, I have
Chris Carpio.
And sitting across from me, I have
Alexandra Stark,
who are normally two of the other hosts on this podcast, but we're going to do this a little bit different today. So for anybody listening to this who goes to Grace, you guys know that we have been going through our series, A Christian Home, for the past couple of weeks. And, we've covered a number of different topics that can apply to really anybody listening to this, and even the people sitting at this table too. We've covered things from seasons of singleness to biblical manhood and even biblical womanhood as well. So we've covered a couple different things, and today I'm going to actually be interviewing Chris and Alexa, because for these two, they actually grew up in a Christian home, whereas I didn't. I still grew up in a very loving household, but we weren't Christians for our entire lives. So there's a couple of different dynamics going around here at this table. And to sort of start off, we always talk about, applying these messages that we hear these pastors speak here at Grace. And for you guys, specifically, if we're talking about, because you guys are both either married or going to be married. Alexa's already married, and Chris is getting married he'll be already married by the time you guys hear this. By the time we're recording this, it's about a week and a half away.
Time travel.
It's crazy.
I know, it's like we're here, but then we're also in the future.
Stuff.
But for you guys specifically, after hearing what a biblical man looks like and what a biblical woman looks like, for you in your own lives, how did you feel yourselves receiving that? And how did you feel yourselves applying it to yourselves and saying, here's where I am and here's where I can grow into with these biblical principles?
Yeah, so I would say while listening to those messages, I mean, both ends, it's pretty interesting in the context of a Christian home, right? Not just like in the context of a man or in the context of a woman, but it was like, okay, what do these roles kind of look like in the home? From my perspective, I didn't grow up my whole life with a nuclear family in the sense of like a mom and a dad, right? It was like probably during what I would consider more formative years, it was really just my mom. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I got to see my mom strive to be more like a Proverbs 31 woman, and desiring to, fulfill like a lot of the things that kind of came with that, but without like a partner, in her life and stuff. But still being like super honorable, still, working really hard. There was never a time that I can remember where there wasn't a meal on the table, even though times were like really tough for us at moments in life. And then when it comes to like a family man, that was interesting because for a long period of time, there was no family man. And I know that for myself growing up, I looked to see and try and discover what was a Christian man supposed to be like, because my biological dad, said that he was a Christian, but he was also the one who like left the home. And then there was another guy in the picture who was my little sister's dad later on in life, who also like attended church, but he also left the picture. So it was like, what am I kind of looking for here? And it's just kind of interesting, like looking at this picture of a Christian home and this idea of what people kind of have, especially with the mindset of like, okay, but when we're going to church, we need to make sure we're all put together. It's like, that's interesting because during the week we're not put together.
Wasn't that one of the ideas we originally had for the opener?
Yeah.
Was like someone getting ready, like a family getting ready, and it's just like all this chaos, and then they get to church and they're just like the picture of perfectness. Like,
yeah, exactly. It's like everyone's being yelled at to like get in the car because we're gonna be late, and then and like there's one kid who's super chill the whole time, but then like the dad takes like 2 minutes to get ready, the mom's been up for like an hour getting ready, and and they're all like high tension, high stress, but then once they get to church, smiles, only smiles. You know, it's very interesting because there is like this dynamic of like, okay, there's this expectation, but what does the reality kind of like look like? We haven't really touched on that really at all.
A little bit with the woman one, because it was, so the big idea for that was that you don't have to be well, I'm severely paraphrasing, but you don't have to be perfect because God is shaping you perfectly. I think I got the second half right. I don't think I got the first half right. But it's like that idea, that concept.
Yeah.
So it kind of is like, hey, we're striving for this perfect image in front of everyone, but the reality is that we're not perfect.
That's true.
You know, so we kind of did, but not fully. I understand where you're going with that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's true. And I think that the way that Cameron decided to take that message was wise, because there is a lot of kind of pressure that comes with perception, but that isn't necessarily like the answer, right? It's like you want genuine growth and like those authentic characteristics, not perceived growth and plastic characteristics.
Right.
And so I don't know, that was interesting, just kind of like going through there and then reflecting back on that and kind of where I am now is like, what you said in terms of my stage of life where I'm, by the time, everyone's listening to this, I will have been married for, a week or two. And
yeah, depending on when I decide to air this.
I'm just giving you a buffer there. But, like, who am I now? How have I allowed my character to grow? Am I reflecting?
That's a deep question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
who
like,
am I?
it's like, have I decided to grow into the characteristics of a godly man that God has outlined in his scripture? Because the truth is, the answers are there. You know, like, I don't necessarily need to go out and find someone in the world that's like reflecting these characteristics, regardless of whether there was one man, living today that was actually reflecting those characteristics or not. My character in itself is not dependent on his example. It's dependent on the example of the word. And so, like, am I choosing to do that, or am I choosing to just like make my own path and choose what it is to like be a man on my own? It's kind of interesting because I've always had that duality, like choosing between the two, like, will I be as my father's, quote unquote, or will I be as my father, capital F.
Oh, capital F. Yeah.
I followed you. I understood.
We got you. We're rolling with you. Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. I appreciate that. What about you, Alexa?
Okay, so family man. So I was fortunate. I had my dad and my mom, and I still have them. That sounded weird the way I said it. Like, I still have them, and they're wonderful people, and I think they're super cool. And my dad, I forget I think it was the third point that Cameron said. It was like, it was something about like play on the floor or something.
Oh, yeah,
Fourth point. Okay.
Life happens on the floor.
Life happens on the floor. Thank you.
It was a good point.
That one actually really stuck out to me because a lot of my memories of my dad from my childhood were us playing on the floor. And I'm like, well past that age now. I don't want to say how old I am now. But anyway, and one of the games that we played was called Out of My Kingdom, and it would be like my dad wrestling us off the bed, like in wrestling, like quote unquote, like not really, I mean, but like wrestling us off. Yeah, he just like kind of gently threw us off the bed or something like that, like. And my brother and I would fight to become the king of the bed, to be the only one. It's like King of the Hill or something like that. So it was that. And it was really fun, and like things like that my dad would do with us, or like he would play like dolls with me and like stuff like that. And it was so funny when Cameron said that point. I was like, that's so true, because like a lot of my memories that I have from my youth, like from my childhood, are like that revolve around my dad, are those kinds of memories of us just like playing on the ground or like all that stuff. And so I think what I also really liked was this idea of a man fighting for his family, because in this day and age, it feels like you're being attacked on all sides of like what manhood's supposed to be, what a womanhood is supposed to be, what singleness is supposed to be, what every single role in the family is supposed to be, what a family is supposed to be. And I think having that male role of fighting for your family in whatever capacity, whether it's you're the man of the house, you're the husband, you're the father, you're the grandfather, you're the uncle, you're the cousin or the brother or the whatever role you are. I think that's to be, that's important to do and be involved in. And I think especially now, like, that's so important for a family. And I just know, like, I'm really thankful for, my dad and my bro's pretty cool too. So like,
shout out to Andy.
And I'm really thankful for the roles that they played in my life. Like, I'm the older sibling, but my brother has always been a really solid biblical man. He's the prayer warrior. I think I've mentioned that in a past podcast, but he really is. So
Yeah.
I think that one was, and also like my husband is such a, Mike, shout out to Mike. He's also such a great biblical man too. Like, he's always trying to provide and lead us towards God. And I think that's really important too, because like he's the spiritual head of the household. So having those roles by men that I admire has been a blessing to me. And for the womanhood one, I mean, my mom's the coolest. I love my mom.
She just friended me on Facebook.
Yeah, me too.
Really? Yeah. She's so cool. I love my mom. I think if I could come out like my mom, that'd be awesome. Because she has always, like, I remember seeing her in a specific chair, always reading the Bible, like in front of me, or talking about BSF, which is Bible Study Fellowship, which is this like really cool organization that they focus on just the Bible and only the Bible, and it's just for women, I believe, and they just do Bible studies. We used to have it here at Grace, which is what my mom used to lead at. And so like seeing her, like, I always thought she was a Proverbs 31 woman, but I also liked how Cameron took the Proverbs 31 woman approach for the womanhood one, because it is hard. Like, that is such a, speaking as a woman, it is something that is slapped in your face in Christian and like the Christian community.
Yeah.
And it's not supposed, I feel like when people do that, they're not trying to be like, oh, you need to do this, but like, it is kind of used, like there's expectations with it.
Yeah.
And when you read it, it's like, I don't know how to sew. Like, I
Yeah.
don't. Like, my grandma's great at sewing, and I usually ask her, but like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Or like picking out vineyards, like, no, I don't buy property. I mean, maybe I should. That would be a great investment. But like, I don't know how to do that. I mean, can I learn it? Probably, maybe. I don't know.
We're going to call a real estate agent after this podcast.
After this podcast, I'm just gonna
We're like switching categories into like economics.
But it's like she has all these things, and it's like, how can one person do it
so
all?
much.
Like,
Yeah.
But I think how Cameron took it as, you don't have to be perfect, which I think is something I struggle with, is perfection. Like, I think, and I think I just always strive to be perfect, and there's just no way to do that. And having that reminder that I'm not perfect, but I'm being shaped perfectly by the one who made me.
Yeah.
And that's like way more important than being perfect or being the ideal woman or the virtuous wife or whatever the other titles were. So I like those sermons. I really like, I know we didn't talk about this, but I also like the singleness one too, because, I was single for a while too before I met my husband now, and I remember all of those feelings of being like, oh, I feel like I'm just waiting.
Yeah.
Like, God, when are you gonna introduce me to this person that you have for me and all that stuff? But I think in hindsight, it was a blessing during that time, because I got to focus on my own relationship with God, which I think, well, we always need to focus on it, but I think I really needed to focus on that time to grow myself spiritually and closer to Jesus, so I could have like that relationship.
Yeah.
And thinking of it in that way, I think was a really great message for that, because I feel like we get so caught up in the negative of it, like, oh, why aren't you with someone?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to be.
Yeah.
Or if you want to be, then they'll come around eventually, maybe.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like, you always have God, and He's the best partner you could ever ask for.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I found so interesting about this series is that our pastors have found a way to not only talk about, obviously what the title of the sermon is about, like whether we're talking about singleness or a man with inside the home or a woman inside the home, but we found a way to apply it to really everybody. Of course we're talking to the specific group, but it's also like people from the outside can still observe this and can still look at this and say, because we were talking to our youth students about it, and when we were going over, manhood and womanhood inside the home, a lot of them necessarily aren't ready for not only marriage, but just maybe even relationships. So we got to the point of, in the future, this is still a good thing to look back on, because girls, you can look and see, okay, what is a true biblical man going to look like inside the home? Is he going to do these things to help, to help me grow the household and grow the family? And then the next week we said to guys, this is what, women can inspire to be. So when you are looking for that biblical woman, you can see if she matches up with what God has outlined in the scriptures. And even, coming from, we were in Proverbs 31, a man wrote it named King Lemuel, and he got the words from a teaching that his mother taught him. So it's all coming from his mother. And this is what, we all look to when, finding that Proverbs 31 woman. But it's just cool that it can apply to sort of everybody. And even for myself, like, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm the only single member of this podcast, and I'm the only single pastor on staff at Grace. And I actually preached the message on singleness to our 6 p.m. service. And I was putting it together, and I made a list literally of people in my life who I keep close that are single besides me, and I found out that number was shockingly low, because I went down the list of Chris is about to be married, Alexa's married, Katya and Matt are married, Andrew and Stephanie are married, and I just went down the list, either married, engaged, in relationships, and I'm like, I'm kind of in my own little bubble, aren't I? But through that, I realized that I was completely skipping over what a blessing singleness could be, which was our big idea for that week, which was to appreciate the blessing of singleness. And at that moment, that message rang totally true for me when, it's not that it would never apply to me in general, but it hit me so much harder than I thought it was going to.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did it feel preaching that? Because you're preaching it to the congregation, but you're also, it applies to you too. How does that feel?
It feels a little weird at first, because it's the things that I'm telling these people to look out for and telling these people to watch for, I'm also experiencing at the same time. So, I mean, as much as they were taking in what was being communicated, I was even taking in my own words, and I was even taking in what God was communicating. And that's the first time that's happened to me in that way. Obviously every message that we preach can apply to us in some sort of way, but to hit really close to the heart like that, in a season of my life that I am specifically in right now, it was not only sort of surreal, but very heartwarming as well, because I felt like God was speaking directly to me as well of, listen,
cool.
You need to appreciate the blessing of singleness as much as the people who hear you are going to appreciate it. And I was like, whoa, what am I going through here? What's this weird feeling I'm getting? But it was really cool to do that. And then, I can now take that with me, throughout the rest of this season, no matter who I see about to get engaged, about, who I see about to get married, I can appreciate the season of singleness that I'm in, which is, it's cool for me, and it's heartwarming for me, because, like I said, everyone around me is either married, engaged, or in a relationship. But sort of like you said, how you took the time to really grow your relationship with God, I can even take that time to do that even more in the season of my life that I'm in, of, truly really pressing in and really not even necessarily searching for, who's going to be the one for me. When is it going to be my turn?
Right.
But I know that I know that time is going to come when God has ordained it. So,
Exactly.
Which is a huge confidence boost, I guess. I don't have to constantly be on the lookout. I know that time is going to come.
Right.
So, which is just an awesome thing that God does.
It's definitely a different seat to be in when you're either constantly looking or confidently waiting, because when you're constantly looking,
those are good words. A good constantly looking or confidently waiting. That feels like a point, in a sermon.
That's a sermon title for the future. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm a pastor. But when you're constantly looking, you're you can put yourself in a position where you're continually disappointed and you're exhausted because you're wondering like when will it be my turn?
Yeah.
Like I keep looking and I'm putting myself out there, but no one's kind of like taking the bait kind of thing. But you don't need to be that way, like you can be just confidently waiting, and waiting doesn't mean like being oblivious to any opportunities that are before you, right? But it's like waiting is not just being so like this one and this one and this one, this one, like I don't know. I just think there's different ways that you can kind of like be there. And yeah, I think one of the points that Cameron made that was kind of underrated, and then also kind of took me like, I think it was underrated to me at first, and it took me a little while to really like receive what it was that he was saying, was that a lot of people at the end of their life will end up being single.
Oh yeah.
It was like 75% or some crazy statistic like that.
I have my family, like the women in my family live a very long time.
Really?
Yeah. Like my great grandmother was 102 when she passed.
Whoa! Wow,
that's
crazy.
Yeah,
So,
I had a family member, a great aunt of mine, that I think was 102 as well when she passed.
So yeah, when he said that, I was like, oh, that could happen.
So that's what I'm shooting for. Okay.
I was like, oh, that could happen.
This is the bar I have to live up to.
I was like, oh no.
Yeah. So with that, like, what I was thinking about it even more so when you were talking about it, Alexa, and thinking about like, okay, there's this, both of us had this like strip of life where we were just like kind of single and stuff. And I know for me, and you said it too, that like it was in that time that we had the opportunity to grow our independent relationships with God. Basically, like, we know how to live life as individuals with Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. And the likelihood is that to either one of us, like, with you or Mike, or with me and Gloria, like, we might end up in that position again where we're living life as singles, just with Jesus. And are we going to be entering in that space for the first time, or is it going to be someplace that is familiar?
Because of how we were before. I see what you're saying.
Because of how we were before, because some
before
people,
we entered the relationship.
Yeah, like some people go straight into like a marriage, like have very few like seasons of independent growth in their relationship with Jesus, and then they get into that space and it's like they've never been there before. That doesn't mean they can't grow in that space. That's not at all what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it definitely like helps to have had that prior and like know that you can like love Jesus outside of loving someone else too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was kind of cool. Also, going back even further to the family man message, one thing that I really liked and really resonated with, which I hope that the men who were there were really listening, was the shepherding aspect of the message. How like we're called to shepherd our home and flock, and like our family is the ones that we're meant to like guide and kind of raise up, in the way in which they should go. And I just really feel like every father and even man, like in their home, everybody, but really in that regard, should take that role very seriously. That they are responsible for how their kids grow up. Like, are they learning about Jesus? Are they observing what it means to love God, like as a man? Or
even just the kids in their lives. Like, it may not be your kid, but it could be like your cousin or your nephew or somebody that you have that relationship with.
Like you have this sphere of influence, even if you don't have a kid. Because there's people who look up to you. I mean, it's always that way. Like, no matter who you are, there's always people that look up to you. But I just really don't want to like dilute the importance of a father in their home as being like the first pastor that their kids ever have. Where it's like their kids look to him for questions on theology, on the Bible, on like just spiritual human life. Like, why do I pray? Why do you pray? Like all of these things that you can eventually, you can ask your children's ministry, Sunday school teacher, but they're not the ones going home with you. And you can ask your youth pastor, but they're not the ones that are showing you at home. It's like your parents are the ones that are like, praying with you before you go to bed. They're the ones that are praying with you at a meal. They're the ones that are praying with you before you go off to school, like reading the Bible with you. Are they doing those things? Those really small things are instrumental in developing the importance of those Christian practices in their hearts.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Like for me, like from my own personal experience, my dad was actually the one that led me to Christ. I was 4 or 6, something around there, and I was being mean to my brother. Sorry, Andy. And my dad, put me in timeout, and then came to my room later and was just like, you sinned. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So my dad explained it to me and how that separates me from Jesus, and explained like the whole path to salvation and how and why I need Jesus. And that day I accepted Jesus with my dad. Like he was the one that led me. But like I said before, like I've seen my mom reading her Bible, my dad reading the Bible, we prayed as a family, like all those things, like they seem little, but they really do have an impact on your kids.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, I mean, I remember,
that's one of the points that Scott says in the message for this week that has already come out. But it's parenting, I think, is the name of the sermon. So if you want to go back and listen to it. But he says that, how does he phrase it? Basically, paraphrasing, he says that it's who they see that they will replicate.
Yeah, it's like monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah, exactly. So you can like say these things to your kids, like, oh, you should read your Bible. Oh, you should pray.
Yeah, but
oh,
if
you should be kind. Oh, you should be patient. Oh, you should be loving. Oh, you should be forgiving. Like,
list all the fruits of the spirit.
I mean, but like the reality is, like, there's a lot of people. I'm just going to say people, because there's a lot of people in our lives who say, like, we should be doing all these things.
Right.
But they themselves do not replicate those things. And if you want your kids to be patient, to be kind, to be loving, then you need to be the first person to be doing all of those things.
Right.
Like, you want them to be humble and come and ask for forgiveness. You need to be willing to do those things with them too, which is a really uncomfortable place for some parents. It's like, oh, I'm not going to apologize to my kids. It's like, if you did something wrong and you want them to know that when something wrong happens, you should apologize, then you have to be willing to do that thing. But that can be hard, right? And so it's like, it's interesting. I know, like, for me, my mom was very humble, and she would often apologize if she felt that she had wronged me or my sisters in some ways. I know that she would pray fervently all the time. We would always pray every night before I went to bed. We'd pray at dinner. We would pray if I was like overwhelmed by something. When I like came to her and I said, like, I don't know what to do, I feel like, I'm confused, she'd be like, let's pray. Like, let's pray about this. And so that taught me, anytime that I'm in that position, even if I'm not with her, like, I should pray. Like, prayer is powerful, and I've seen the fruits of of prayer because we prayed so much. And then also, like, the humility to ask when you're in need of the body of Christ.
Right.
Like, that's huge. That's something that I had the opportunity to see firsthand because, like I said, like, my mom was a single mom for a pretty long time, and there would be times where it was like our family was either in crisis or, me or one of my other siblings were going out and doing some crazy stuff, that we shouldn't have been doing. And my mom would be like, prayer blast. Like, she's like, I don't care how this makes my family look. Like, I know that God is powerful and he can work through his people. And so she would just put it out there and just be like, I need you to pray for my children because I want them to come back to Jesus. And it's like that kind of humility. It's like, whoa, like, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, it would be some things that I'm sure a lot of people would feel uncomfortable with sharing, but like, my mom just believed in the power of prayer and the power of the body of Christ, So yeah, it's just, if you want your kids to be warriors, then you need to be a warrior.
Yeah.
If you're not a warrior, suit up,
Put on that full armor of God.
Yeah, for real. it's not light armor. You know, and well, in reality, it's actually fairly simple to put on. Like, but it's about doing it. You know, and actually considering it a value. That's, I think, kind of hard to wrap our minds around, because it's pretty easy to not put it on and go through your day.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, sort of going into my mom for a second too, because since, you know, everyone in my family has come to accept Christ in the years since that's happened, my mom has consistently, like, whether she's, you know, reading her Bible, or she just actually handed in her final draft of her book that she was writing, and no matter what, she goes into work around 9 a.m. At least 2 hours every day beforehand, she's up reading something. And every time, you know, when me and my sister would go off to school, or we would be getting ready to go to class or something, or getting ready to go to work before she went in, you know, she would always be reading. She would always just be flipping through her Bible. And now she's switched to, you know, constantly working on her book, constantly, you know, just sitting in silence and like listening to God. And I very much tried to model myself after that. I can't quite do 2 hours like she does, so I do an hour and a half. Sorry, Mom, I can't quite do 2 hours.
Honestly.
Yeah, I know, but she's just always tried to set that example. And, you know, of course there's been times where, you know, we've gotten in our scuffles, quote unquote, and she always says, Michael, what happens, you know, if we ever fight? Like, you know, we fight, we wait for an hour, and then we get over it. And like, and sort of like you said, like, if she ever thinks that she came off too harsh, like, she's always the one to come in and apologize. My mom is very humble in that way too. So, and she's, you know, always about setting that example, even if she's not perfect in it, because nobody is. She's always the one willing to correct that wrong, and always the one, along with my dad, to make sure that, you know, we're always giving that glory to God, always making sure that he is our first and foremost, and nothing else comes before him. That's the biggest thing for them, is that, you know, no matter what, my dad would always come in. You know, if me and my mom were fighting, he goes, no matter what, I love you. He would hug my mom. I love you. He'd hug me. And then he's like, we're all going to give this to God no matter what. And that's just a huge, like, that's been a huge inspiration for me, like, just having my parents able to do that. So here's another question I want to ask the both of you, since I feel like I have a little bit of a gold mine here with two people that have come from a Christian home and gone into ministry. So
yeah, that's true.
It's true. You guys are both in ministry, yeah. Not even ministry, but just, you know, coming up in a healthy church and living a good Christian life. So this is for, you know, maybe anybody listening to this that doesn't love the state of their home, whether it's a Christian home or not. What do you guys have any advice for people who maybe are in a Christian home but don't love the way things are going right now? Since you guys have both grown up in situations of a Christian home where you guys turn out pretty well. So,
oh, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. But
I think you're lying to me.
Oh, I'm not.
Flattery gets you everywhere.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to compliment two of my friends here. But, you know, for anybody who's sort of going through that, do you have advice for them of, like, going through a tough time in the home?
Well, I think right off the bat, like, I grew up in a Christian home, but just to be very clear, a Christian home, again, is not a perfect home.
Right.
Like, I had many, many times where my relationships with my parents were, like, the most frustrating thing in the world. And my parents' relationships with me were the most frustrating thing in the world.
Me too.
You know, like,
teen years, right?
yeah. No, for real.
Sometimes early 20s for me too.
And there were times where, you know, I wanted to, like, run away. There were times where I was just, like, just angry, just always angry. You know, I would go, I remember it was, like, almost like a year, and I remember my siblings and my mom being like, why are you so angry? And especially when you're, like, a teenager, emotions are just, like, the most overwhelming thing in the world.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you it's like you had all the, like, you know, perfect emotions when you were like a toddler. At least that's how you remember it, because in reality you probably didn't. You probably had tons of tantrums.
I think you kind of come back to being a toddler in
Yeah.
teenage years, but it's
Yeah.
like you can articulate
yeah,
more.
but you're like aware of
Yeah.
your tantrums, you know.
So you're just like, I'm feeling all of everything.
So what I would say is like, don't allow your faith to be dictated by your home experience. Your like I said, like your character is not dependent on the examples of people around you. Like, do not use that as an excuse as to whether to leave your faith or whether to become stagnant in your faith. Like, Jesus is the ultimate example in your life. The Word of God has given you the direction as to how your home should be structured, right? Like, I'm going into this season of life where I'm going to have to start to try and create that foundation myself. And I know for a fact that I am going to have kids that disagree with my, like, well, not for a fact that I'm going to have kids, because I don't know if I'm going to have kids. You know,
if you
God
have
willing.
kids,
But if you had
they
kids.
might.
But yeah, but if I had kids, they would probably disagree with some of the decisions that I make, because it's my imperfect implementation.
There you go.
There we go. Of what the Word is calling me to do, right? On days where I don't want to do what God says, and then on days where I do want to do what God says. Because the reality is, which I think this is like one of the most interesting things to me when I think of parents, is and their kids. Like, kids think their parents are superheroes. We like dehumanize parents for some reason. And what I mean by that is, like, we think that they don't have emotions, right? We're like, oh, well, you don't actually get hurt by these terrible things that I say to you. I can just say whatever I want to you, and I can get, like, you know, like, it doesn't matter. If you said them to me, though, then that's the end of the world, you know? Or that they don't have bad days, or, you know, that they're not tired or stressed out, you know?
That is true.
Like, it's weird. For some reason, that all of those things just bypass our parents, and we allow for other people in our lives to have them, but for some reason we don't do that with our parents. And so remember, like, you know, I'm not saying, you know, it's really dependent on your home experience. Like, if it's like an abusive experience or something like that, stress does not give like an allowance for abuse. But what I am saying is that, like, if your parents are having a bad day, be considerate and wonder, you know, ask, hey, are you okay? Are you having a stressful day? Like, you know, can I do anything for you? You know, we desire for our parents to ask that of us when we're growing up, but we should also be willing to ask them that too.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, exactly. We think about that way later on in life when we realize how stressful life is, but you can start thinking about that even when you're in high school or in middle school. Yeah, because, you know, if you're growing up in a house that's rough around the edges, like, again, my house is really rough around the edges. Like, for a while, my mom was a single mom, and then my mom got married to my stepdad, and then he brought in 3 stepsisters, like, that were now my new sisters, who were all in, like, similar age brackets to the rest of my siblings. And they all had their baggage, and we all had our baggage. And you're basically taking all these teenagers and throwing them into one home, which is the equivalent of a blender, and putting it on high of emotions, right? And then, like, 2 parents with different parenting styles. And it took us like 14 years to actually figure out how to, like, talk to one another, how to love one another, how to not be constantly screaming at one another. And it wasn't because we didn't love Jesus that we were screaming at each other. It was because we're broken people trying to figure out how to do life with each other. Now we're at a place where we're doing that in a much healthier way by the grace of God. But growing up, like, that wasn't easy. And so it's like, have patience, have endurance, realize that your life in the home isn't forever. Right? Like, there will come a point by God's grace that you move out of that home, and then you can make those decisions on your own. But while you're there, honor your parents, right? That doesn't mean, like, again, like, if they're abusive, to just do whatever they say, right? If they're calling you to do something that's against what God instructs, then, you know, be discerning of that. But honoring is like allowing for an appropriate amount of weight to be put on their words when considering what actions to take. We talked about that. Do you end up saying
I
that?
did. Well, I was gonna say at the end of this, I'm like, Chris is gonna end up spoiling half my message for 2 weeks. But no, it's okay.
No,
this stuff
it'll come out before.
Spoiler
Yeah.
alert.
It'll come out before that.
But all this stuff is extremely profound that you're saying.
Well, it's like important, right?
Right.
And it's because like I grew up in that, basically the house that you're talking about. Like I grew up in that house, but it wasn't because my family wasn't a Christian home. Like we were a Christian home. We were just like, this is just really what some Christian homes can be like,
Right.
You know. And we faithfully serve in the church. Like my mom and my stepdad both like on the praise team, and volunteering and Run for God and all these other things, and they were striving their best to live out their relationships with Jesus. And the kids, the same thing. We were striving our best. Like I was a student leader, my sister was a student leader, both my sisters on the praise team, like all these things. But at home, it was still a blender, but we were still progressively being sanctified by Jesus. And that's what I think is like really beautiful, is that yes, we do have this guide. What is a family man? What is a godly woman? What should a teenager act like in the home? What should a child act like in a home? It's like here's like the plumb line, right? Like here's how we should grow up, but realize that we're all beautifully broken at the same time.
Yeah.
And being made new, and along the way, that's going to be a process that takes time to restore.
Right. And I mean, you just said something that, talking about broken people learning how to deal with emotions and learning how to talk to each other, like as, kids grow up, as parents grow a little bit older and maybe parenting styles change, that, you said this is just what Christian homes look like. But I mean, even so, going beyond that, like that's just what some homes look like in general. Like no home is perfect. And I love that you pointed that out. Like, even though you grew up in a Christian home, like that home was not perfect, and no home is perfect. There will still be times through that where people, parents and teenagers get into fights, get into disagreements over things that are said or the way things are done. But you said the difference is that you're all being sanctified by Jesus, and hopefully, I remember one point in my life, like we all had to come before God at some point and really lay everything down as a family, not just as individuals, but as a family, as a unit together in order to move past things.
Yeah.
So stuff like that is huge for any family, really, whether it's a broken home or whether the home seems pretty well put together. Like any home needs to be like that. It needs to be a family unit coming before God.
Yeah.
So. Do you have anything to add, Alexa?
I was just trying to think. I was like, Chris did such a good job. I don't really know.
He just went. He went
I
on
was
a
like,
run.
I don't really know if I have anything to add, except maybe don't let yourself get in your own way of a relationship with Jesus, because like there are so many things that are external or even internal for yourself and your role. Like maybe you feel like, you're not measuring up as a family man to your family because you're not providing in the way you envisioned. Or maybe you feel like, you're run down from all the kids that you've been taking care of that day. Or you feel like there's just not enough time in the day, or you feel like, that you're lacking in some way. The truth is that each day, nothing's going to be absolutely perfect. The only thing that's perfect is Jesus, and that's the only thing we can really, truly go back to. So don't allow yourself to get in your own way of having that relationship with him. Like even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it, just read your Bible, spend time with him. Even if you fall asleep spending time with him, like that's okay. Like it's no matter how the home is or how you feel inside, that's like the important. It doesn't matter. Like that's the only thing I could really add, because I think Chris like nailed it. Like I really don't have much to add, but like also for everyone in all of their different roles, whether it's as being a single or a child or a teen or a wife or a woman or whatever, relationships have their ebbs and flows. Things have to change, and you have to keep in mind that the other person's also adjusting to the change. So like, especially for teens, like you went from being a little kid that your parents could bring around to now having a car and driving and all these things. Like have some patience with your parents in this time of change. Just like you're trying to figure out your new responsibility and role, they're trying to figure out your new responsibility and role, and vice versa. Like there's a lot in relationships and ebbs and flows. So just have a lot of grace and patience with each other. I think that's the only thing I can really add. And it's kind of just highlighting what he already said. So just listen to Chris's part.
Well, listen to Alexa's part too. No, that was good too. But guys, I want to thank you for being open about your experiences in your past with your families. I think that, people listening to this can be encouraged by those things and can be enlightened by those, each of your circumstances, that, if they apply in one way or another, that, they can still be led to Jesus, and they can still have their relationship with Jesus no matter what their home life looks like, and no matter what their circumstances look like the only one that is perfect is Jesus Christ, and he is the only one that we look to. He is our ultimate role model, even though, we want to say we look up to certain people and maybe look to our parents, our friends, like the role model and the example that we follow is Jesus, the perfect and sinless one. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank you guys both for being open and just being here, because you guys are wonderful to talk to. Mm-hmm. So
thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Flattery, man.
I see. I'm just turning it up to 10. But guys, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Grace Speaks, and we will see you next time.
See you guys.
Bye.